Hello and welcome to this weekend's practice edition of the Race Weekend's data analysis for the Monaco Grand Prix, the series in which we compile all of the practice data and pit the teammates against each other to see how well they're doing for this session and how well they have done so far across the season. Don't fret, the qualifying edition will come out slightly later today. It is currently 7 minutes past 1. I have 53 minutes until qualifying begins, so this video will come out just after or just before qualifying, and then the qualifying edition will come out slightly later today. So with all of that out of the way, let us jump on in to the Race Weekend's data analysis for Monaco, and we are looking at the practice data today. So let's just take a little rundown of each of the sessions, and we begin with practice number uno, headed for the first time by Sergio Perez in the Red Bull gear. However, he was on the soft compound of tyre, much like Carlos Sainz, whereas Max Verstappen was on the medium compound of tyre, and Pierre Gasly finds himself above the two Mercedes in 5th and 6th. Then we get to practice number 2, and it's the two Ferraris who dominate this session. Leclerc P1, Sainz P2, the only two drivers in the 1:11 11s. Lewis Hamilton is P3 ahead of Max Verstappen with Bottas P5. It is Sergio Perez though who slips down to P8, with the Alfa Romeos and the Aston Martins sort of swapping positions slightly, and the Alpines slowly coming forward to 12th and to 14th. Ricciardo though struggling still in P15, and the two Williams ahead of the two Haas cars. And then we get to the session which has literally just finished, practice number 3, topped by Max Verstappen and the two Ferraris. The two Ferraris are exceptionally quick around this Monaco Grand Prix, and they are a definite threat to pole position. I firmly believe right now it is a pole position shootout between the two Ferraris and Max Verstappen. I do not think that the Mercedes have the pace for pole position. But looking a bit further down that order, we've got Bottas P4, Perez P5, Norris ahead of Hamilton, Raikkonen inside the top 10, Gasly as well inside the top 10. The Aston Martins of Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll are creeping forward with Giovinazzi in between. Ricciardo has crept forward from P15 to P13. He is 1 second down on Lando Norris. A very disappointing practice so far, with Alpine also having an exceptionally disappointing practice down in P15 and last. There were no issues with them, they were just slow. And equally, Yuki Tsunoda having a very iffy session down in P19, and unfortunately at the very end we had a crash for Mick Schumacher. It is looking unlikely that he is going to get that car repaired, or at least Haas are going to get that car repaired for qualifying. However, taking all of these lap times for each of the 3 practice sessions, we can plot them onto a graph and see the overall practice progression. Now, we do have an extremely steep time all the way up to Charles Leclerc's FP1 time, however he only did 2 laps and had a gearbox issue, so I haven't really included that. And we can see it's a nice gentle progression down, as there is a nice improvement from FP1 to FP2 to FP3. Some drivers go backwards in the case of the two Haas cars, and also an Alfa Romeo of Yuki Tsunoda, AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda, and then there are other drivers which increase more than others. And then taking each team's fastest time, we can determine the improvement from each session to session, and for FP1 to FP2, it is Alfa Romeo. Closely followed by Alpine, Ferrari and Mercedes, with McLaren in the middle, and all the way at the bottom, Haas only improved by 0.2. And then taking a look at the improvements from FP2 to FP3, it is the other way round. It is Haas this time who make leaps and bounds, 1.2 seconds between the two sessions, as Alpine is the only team to lose time. They lost 1.5 from FP2 to FP3. They have gone backwards. But now, compiling all of this information and pitting the teammates together, we are going in 2020 championship order, so we do begin with Mercedes. Everything is timestamped in the description down below, so you can skip to whichever section and whichever team you would like me to talk about. But we do start with Mercedes, and we've got all of their positional charts on the left, and we can see that in Monaco, especially in FP1, it's a little bit of a poor performance from Mercedes, whereas FP2, you could say it was a little bit of a poor performance, but for Valtteri Bottas, not so much. And then FP3, a definite poor performance from Lewis Hamilton. Both drivers, though, were exceptionally close, looking at the Mercedes practice progression graph in the top middle, with the largest gap being 2.5 in FP3 in favour of Valtteri Bottas. That is the first time he has been in front of Lewis Hamilton all season in practice 3. And then taking a look at the gaps in the top right, that is the gaps for each session, and then the gaps in the bottom left is the average gaps across the 4 races previous in this season. And taking a look at the gap in the middle for FP2 in favour of Lewis Hamilton across the whole season so far, that is 0.2, whereas his FP2 advantage in Monaco over Valtteri Bottas was just 0.03 of a second, so that gap is slowly coming down. And then taking a look from Mercedes, we go to Red Bull, and this shows a sort of interesting progression, especially for Sergio Perez. It is a nice decreasing progression, what we expect to see from Max Verstappen, but Sergio Perez sort of went backwards a little bit. And I would expect his true pace to be around half a second slower than Max Verstappen. It's just FP1 was a little bit of an outliery result as he was on a different compound. And between the C5 and the C4 compound, Pirelli predict there to be about a 7/10 difference. But taking a look interestingly at the FP3 positions chart, Max Verstappen maintains his P1 position in FP3 for across the whole season so far. And then comparing the gaps to the average gaps as well, the FP2 gap has increased in Max Verstappen's favour by 0.2, whereas the FP3 gap has decreased by 0.2 overall. So overall, not too bad. And then we take a look at McLaren, and after the high of the previous race in Spain, we go back to Daniel Ricciardo being about 0.9 on average across the 3 sessions behind Lando Norris. This is extremely disappointing to see, especially around a track which Daniel Ricciardo loves. This is the track that he has scored the most points at out of any in his entire career. And comparing these gaps around Monaco to the average gaps so far ahead for Lando Norris across the season, they are all significantly over double what they are across the whole season so far. So this is absolutely an outlier result for Daniel Ricciardo and a very, very confusing practice session for him. And then from McLaren, we take a look at Aston Martin, and it is Sebastian Vettel who is always consistently ahead of Lance Stroll this time, on average by about 0.2 of a second across the 3 sessions, so not as significant as the Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo gap. And looking at the average gaps so far across the season in FP1 and FP2, where Sebastian Vettel has been in front in the past 4 races, the gaps have increased going into Monaco, which is a very, very good sign for the German driver. However, in terms of the head-to-head battles, he is only leading the FP1 head-to-head. It is Lance Stroll who still has the stranglehold over FP2 and FP3. And then from Aston Martin, we take a look at Alpine, and I've already said that this is an extremely disappointing session for the team, and we can see that here. They made leaps and bounds worth of improvement from FP1 to FP2, but then both drivers went backwards into FP3, which is very, very significant. There is also a 0.2 gap between the 2 drivers in FP3, which is actually significantly higher than Alonso's average advantage over Esteban Ocon in FP3, which just stands at 0.04 across the first 4 races. And then in terms of the head-to-head, it is 3-2 in favour of Esteban Ocon in FP1 and FP2, but then 3-2 in favour of Fernando Alonso in FP3, as even as you could get in the first 5 races. And then from Alpine, we take a look at Ferrari, and they had a mega session. Unfortunately though for Charles Leclerc, it was a bit of an iffy session in FP1 with that gearbox issue. The 7-second gap that is displayed in the gaps chart will not be included in the averages used for the next round, in wherever the next round is. I'm not 100% sure, but it will be excluded from those averages. And we can see from the positions chart that especially in FP2 and FP3, they have been on a downwards trajectory, heading closer to the front in all of the practice sessions, which is very, very positive to see. And as for the gaps as well, both drivers are getting much closer to each other as well. And then, however, we take a look at AlphaTauri. There is a nice progression for Pierre Gasly in the black line. However, Yuki Tsunoda, I don't know what's going on with Yuki Tsunoda. It's really, really, really disappointing to see such inconsistencies from him in all of the 5 races and the 5 editions of this practice data analysis that I have done. He has been exceptionally inconsistent. Now, I do understand and I do get that it is his first full season in Formula 1. However, like Helmut Marko has said, he needs to show some discipline and he needs to be quick. And at the moment, he has neither. He showed flashes of good and glimpses of what he can do in Bahrain, but we haven't really seen anything since. Then from AlphaTauri, we take a look at Alfa Romeo, who also had exceptionally good sessions. Their head-to-head performances are a bit all out of whack, whereas their gaps though, they're all fairly average for what we've had so far. The FP2 average in favour of Giovinazzi is near enough the same. There is just 0.005 of a second difference between the average over the whole season and what was achieved in FP2 in Monaco. And compared that to the FP3 advantage in favour of Raikkonen, there is about a tenth, just over a tenth difference between the times. And other than having a very good session for Alfa Romeo, there isn't really anything else to report. I'm expecting both cars quite comfortably to get into Q2. And then penultimately, we take a look at Haas. Now, interestingly, it was Nikita Mazepin who had a hold over Mick Schumacher in both FP1 and FP2. Only just in FP2 by just 0.009 of a second, but that was the first time he led Mick Schumacher in FP2. And it was looking likely that it was going to be the case in FP3 as well, as Mazepin for a long period of time was P15 and Schumacher was P20, but then shortly before Schumacher's crash he went up to P14, but then subsequently crashed, so take that with your own pinch of salt. And in terms of the gaps that we've observed in Monaco in the top right, they're all the smallest that we have seen so far, looking at the average gaps in the bottom right. And then finally, for the practice edition of the Monaco Race Weekend data analysis, we take a look at Williams. And interestingly, it was Nicholas Latifi who led George Russell in FP1 by half a second. However, in the subsequent FP2 and FP3 sessions, it was George Russell who outperformed him by less than a tenth in each session. So Latifi does actually stand a good chance at possibly out-qualifying George Russell this time. However, he also binned it in FP3 as well, causing a small little red flag issue. Not as significant damage as the Haas car, but still damage nonetheless. And taking a look at those averages, they have all come down, especially the ones that George Russell has over Nicholas Latifi, which is very, very promising for the Canadian. And there we go, there is the practice edition for the Monaco Race Weekend's data analysis, all done and dusted. The practice edition will come out hopefully just before or just after qualifying, and then the qualifying edition will come out slightly later this evening once I've crunched all of the numbers and edited and recorded it. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. Please let me know what you found best about practice so far and what you were looking forward to in qualifying. And I will catch you in that qualifying edition slightly later today.